What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Dustin Poirier calls out Conor Mcgregor. According to former two-division UFC champion Conor McGregor, he will make his highly anticipated return to the octagon in December to square off against Michael Chandler at UFC 296. While the news certainly excited the MMA community, it's also raised a number of questions, given that the date would rule out McGregor going through the 6-month testing period USADA wants him to go through. During a recent interview with MMA News, Dustin Poirier spoke about the possibility of McGregor being granted an exemption from the mandatory 6 months of testing.
You know, I like USADA, and I do think they're doing a good job of cleaning up our sport. But you know, it just, for me, if they waive that and allow him to compete with no drug testing, it kind of just makes a joke of the whole thing. You know, we just remove it completely. You know, there shouldn't be gray areas. It's white and black with USADA. You take tests, you pass them, you're able to compete. You don't take tests, you don't compete. You know, there was never a gray area before.
So far, there's been no word from the UFC on how McGregor's return will be handled, meaning fans will have to wait and see how things play out. In the case of Dustin Poirier, the former interim champ has made it clear that he wants to make his return as soon as possible in order to put his recent UFC 291 loss behind him. As he mulls over his options, former opponent Michael Chandler believes he should steer clear of a move to 170 pounds. During a recent episode of DC and RC, the former Bellator MMA champ offered Poirier some advice.
If I'm Dustin Poirier or Dustin Poirier's management, he's not a big 155-pounder. Some people would say he could make 145, and I say case in point, when somebody pulled out of the fight, it was Tony Ferguson, Nate Diaz, of that whole debacle with Chimaev. He stepped on the scale, took a picture of himself. He was in the 170s. I'm about 190 right now. He's not a big lightweight.
Mike.
I don't think it's smart for him to go up to 170. You get hit with a 170-pound punch, it's a lot harder than
Mike,
155.
you're fighting at 170.
155.
As Chandler also indicated during his appearance on DC and RC, he and Conor McGregor will be fighting at 170 pounds, a comment which may or may not have led to Iron Mike being on the receiving end of a scathing shot from his upcoming opponent, who tweeted, "I've industrial steel in my leg now, and I've long natural steel in the shoulders and elbows and knuckles of the fist. I'm over 3/4 steel, and steel crushes iron, crushes the little bones in iron's face. Out with the iron, you little Bosu Ball motivational speaking handbag." Between McGregor's recent comments about the two fighting in December and Chandler's steadfast eagerness to fight the former champ, it sounds as though the ball is in the UFC's court. Stay tuned for updates as they become available. UFC fight updates. Reports have indicated that 4 new fights have been added to upcoming UFC cards for the months ahead, starting with the highly anticipated return of Raul Rosas Jr., who will be fighting Terrence Mitchell after suffering the first loss of his pro career at UFC 287. On the flip side, Mitchell will be looking to bounce back from a UFC 290 loss to Cameron Saaiman last month. The bout will take place on the upcoming Noche UFC card on September 16th at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Next up on the calendar, we have an October 7th clash between Daniel Pineda and Hussein Askabov, set for an event at the UFC Apex. The bout will see Pineda look to bounce back from a June loss to Alex Caceres, while Hussein Askabov will look to bounce back from the first loss of his professional career, sustained in his UFC debut back in February. The following month, an event on November 18th at the UFC Apex will play host to 2 reported bouts. First up, we have a clash between Kyung-Ho Kang and John Castaneda, which will see Kang look to extend a 2-fight win streak, while Castaneda looks to build on a recent win over Muin Gafurov. The card will also see Jordan Levitt and Chase Hooper collide in a fight that's sure to contain some exciting grappling exchanges. Levitt will be looking to build on a win over Victor Martinez back in February, while Hooper will be looking to build on a win over Nick Fiore in his return to lightweight. Before we shift gears, drop your thoughts on these recently announced fights in the comment section down below. Colby Covington talks about Leon Edwards' fight. Although there's been plenty of hype regarding a clash between Leon Edwards and Colby Covington, it sounds as though a fight is still quite a ways off from being finalized. While speaking with Hall of Famer Michael Bisping during a recent appearance on the former champ's YouTube channel, Covington seemingly cast doubt on the fight taking place at UFC 295 in November.
Yeah, the situation is Leon Edwards Scissorhands is still hiding from me. Apparently, you know, he knows I'm a lot tougher challenge than I even think of him. You know, if it was so easy, I think he would have came out and he would have already tried to defend already.
The interview released on Thursday, amid rumors that the UFC 295 co-main event would be announced sooner rather than later. Of course, Covington also claimed that Jon Jones has refused to share a card with him, alleging that the heavyweight champ will not allow the UFC to book the fight for November 11th. If that's true, the UFC could wind up booking the fight for UFC 296, the promotion's final pay-per-view card of the year. With fans chomping at the bit for updates, there's optimism that the UFC could make a big announcement regarding the bout on the UFC 292 broadcast this weekend. Stay tuned for updates as they become available. Dana White praises Sean O'Malley. UFC President Dana White had plenty of praise for bantamweight #1 contender Sugar Sean O'Malley, leading up to Sugar's highly anticipated UFC 292 title fight with Aljamain Sterling on Saturday. While speaking during a recent appearance on TMZ Sports, White heaped the praise on O'Malley.
Sean O'Malley burst into the scene on the show that I was just talking about, the Contender Series, with an unbelievable knockout. At that time, we had Snoop Dogg doing the commentary. He went crazy when O'Malley won, and O'Malley became a star for us. And this guy has unbelievable knockout power. The young demographic loves him like they love Mcgregor. And if he could win a world title on Saturday night, he will be a big star.
With Fight Week underway, it's safe to say the anticipation is continuing to build for the highly anticipated scrap. When O'Malley and Sterling make their walks to the octagon on Saturday night, the TD Garden is sure to be on its feet for what's shaping up to be a massive moment for the 135-pound division. Before we continue, make sure you give that like button some love, and be sure to subscribe to the MMA Zone for all of the latest news. Chris Weidman disrespected by the UFC. Former UFC middleweight champion Chris Weidman wasn't too pleased to find out that his return to the octagon would take place on the preliminary card of UFC 292. Although many expected Weidman to retire following his devastating injury at UFC 261, given that he's gone just 2-5 since losing the middleweight title, the All-American set his sights on a big return. Despite not being too happy with the UFC placing him on the prelim card, Weidman recently explained in an interview with ESPN that he's used the situation as motivation.
It's kind of disrespectful, to be honest. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. Like, to be out for 2 years with a broken injury, I broke my leg on the mats of the UFC on a pay-per-view. First card ever since COVID, first fully packed arena in Jacksonville. Put my body on the line, and then they put me on a prelim.
As Weidman has boldly proclaimed, he plans to open his fight this weekend against Brad Tavares with a thunderous leg kick as a way to prove that he's 100% back. Whether he'll be able to take the next step towards earning himself a spot in the UFC's middleweight rankings, only time will tell. Dillon Danis reacts to UFC altercation. Dillon Danis may perhaps be best known for his role in sparking the infamous UFC 229 brawl following Conor McGregor's loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov. After the Eagle secured the submission win, he was briefly seen pointing through the cage before he then climbed out of the octagon and jumped into the crowd. Waiting for him was none other than Dillon Danis, who recently reflected on the ordeal during an episode of the Full Send podcast.
I never expected him to jump, but then he was pointing at me and I went like that, and then he just jumped. In my head too, at the time, I wasn't the best striker. I was like, what the fuck do I do here? I'm gonna get into a fucking striking fight with Khabib right now. So like he ended up, I like clocked him and then he backed up. I was doing like uppercuts and then security was holding me. I'm getting punched in the back of the head. Like that whole night was crazy.
Danis, of course, is currently gearing up to make his highly anticipated return to competition in October, where he's expected to step into the boxing ring to take on Logan Paul. While the bout has continued to generate plenty of talk on social media, many have questioned whether or not Danis will actually make it to the fight given his recent last-minute withdrawal against KSI. With he and McGregor both eager to return to active competition in the coming months, it'll be interesting to see how things play out. And now for our breaking news story of the day. We have Dana White suspending a UFC fighter for steroids. Daniel Rodriguez tested positive for Ostarine and is now off of his fight on September 16th. He released a statement earlier saying, "Today I was notified that an out-of-competition sample that I provided to USADA was positive for an extremely low level of Ostarine. First and foremost, I want to clarify I did not intentionally use Ostarine, nor have I ever knowingly used any prohibited substances in my career. From my first fight until today, I've had a negative test every single time, not one slip-up, not one positive test until today." What do you think about this situation? Let us know in the comments below. Top comments. I want to see the UFC succeed because I love MMA, but I can't disagree with this judge's ruling. The contract models are scummy as hell. Fighters should get a bump in pay for taking short notice fights. It's a big risk to fight someone you didn't train for. Colby would never talk shit to Jones's face unless he was surrounded by cops. If you want to be featured on our next video, make sure to leave a comment and don't forget to check out yesterday's video in case you missed it.